recording. All right, so I'm excited that Peter Kujawa from, as I said, I know you from Evolve and Sleek, is joining us to chat all the things. They do so many interesting things, I think, with industry benchmarking. And Peter had some numbers specifically around QBRs. And when I saw that, I said, you have to come join us, please. I didn't say you have to, but I am a bully like that. So maybe I did. So we've invited Peter to come chat with us today. So thanks for joining us.
I'm really thrilled to be here. You don't have to twist my arm too much, Marnie. I love your content. Got your books on my shelf behind. So no, I'm a big fan of what you're doing and follow you at the meetings as well. So, and actually I'm with, just for my housekeeping, I'm with Service Leadership, which is part of ConnectWise. And so the Evolve community is one that we work with really closely. We work with some other coaching communities as well, and we benchmark worldwide. We benchmark the entire Evolve community, and we benchmark, and the entire Evolve community since last year is also now using Sleek, which is our performance operational maturity performance improvement tool. And so when you see me running around out at Evolve meetings every quarter and going from room to room to room, what we're doing is we're going in and talking to the Evolve members about how they're doing, what their performance of the community is, what the performance of the managed service industry overall is, and providing them some data around that. And then also just talking to them about what they might be working on in Sleek for operational maturity level improvement that quarter, what traits they might be working on, and then whatever else is on their mind. And a frequent topic that I hear, whether it's at the Evolve peer groups or all the service leadership peer groups, we still lead 6 different peer groups that are service leadership groups, is QBRs. It's a frequent discussion. So looking forward to our discussion today.
We always used to say QBRs were like the weather. Everybody was talking about it. Nobody was doing anything about it. So we're glad that everybody's doing things about it now.
Oh, they're doing things now. It's a hot topic. So
yeah, for
I hear about it in a lot of rooms. It's probably I would put it on the top 3, with number 1 hot topic still being return to office and hybrid and remote work and all the challenges, different cyber issues, including insurance. Those continue to be a top 3 topic, and then QBRs I'd put right up there.
Yeah, we wouldn't disagree with that at all. Did you want to share some slides of some findings you have? Do you want to have a conversation? How would you like to play today?
Oh yeah, we certainly we can start with a slide. I'm happy to show you. So every year, one of the things that we publish is our annual profitability report, and this year's report will be coming out on the 29th, so end of next week. And so anybody who is an Evolve member will get a copy of it. Anybody who is a service leadership customer through the service leadership profitability bundles through ConnectWise, which includes benchmarking, Sleek, and our 2 reports every year, our compensation report, which came out a few months ago, and this report will get a copy. Anybody else can buy a copy of this though, but it's it'll be about 300 pages. It's really light reading. It's all
your slides aren't even light reading, let me tell you.
Yeah, no, this is about, if you like one slide, you'll love 300 of them. But we decided to do a deep dive this year on 5 different OML traits, and one of those that we decided to do, yeah, great. I see the comment about
Brian uses
using it through C-level. That's great. So we decided to do a deep dive this year on 5 different OML traits, and one of those was QBRs. And so what we did was we went in and looked at, we ran the data on OML within our partner set, and we have the largest partner database of anybody in the industry. And again, it's worldwide. It's all different sizes of MSPs, and we looked at the correlation between OML performance in these 5 traits and profitability. And so, so I'll show you this is a little sneak peek for what'll be in the report coming. Give me just a minute.
So I put in the chat, but also since many people listen to the recording, OML is operational maturity level. So that is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, operational maturity level OML was trademarked by Service Leadership about 8 or 9 years ago. So you're starting to see other orgs use it, but Service Leadership and now ConnectWise actually owns that trademark. All right, let me know when you can see this.
Yep, you're good.
All right, so what we saw on OML 1 to 5, and there's some different, when you go through Sleek, you're answering several different questions about how you're doing business today. And based on the answers on that, you're rated from an operational maturity level 1 to 5. And so what you see is that if you go from an OML 1 to an OML 5, as you go up, there's a little bit of a difference when you go up to OML 3. And one of the prime scores in this is going to be your frequency of delivering QBRs. So are you doing QBRs periodically? OML2 is you're doing them upon customer request. Typically, OML3 is you're doing them about half the time for your clients. When you get up to OML5, you're doing QBRs for your clients, all of your managed service clients, and you're doing it every quarter. And so there's some additional characteristics that go into that. But what you see is that when you go from doing them, never doing them to doing them upon customer request, you get a little bit of a lift in profitability. But it's roughly the same if you do them on customer request to doing them half the time. But it's over a 2x improvement from doing them half the time to doing them every quarter. And then you also see on your managed service gross margin, it goes from 37.5 up to 53 from OML 1 to 5. So what we saw in this particular trait was a really clear correlation on both profitability and managed service gross margin. So our lesson to this and the discussion, there's a few pages of additional narrative in our report, is how to do this, but also why. Why is this so important? And my theory on this is that I think that if you're doing QBRs every quarter with your clients, first of all, there's the harvest of the for the farmer aspect of it, and that is I'm going to be taking away all these action items. I'm learning things that are opportunities, ways I can improve the business, or their business, the customer's business, and make their life better. And we're updating our roadmap with them, and we're doing all these things on a quarterly rhythm. So all of those things are important for me to deliver my services to my clients. So I'm going to improve my efficiency delivering my services. That's going to improve my managed service gross margin. I'm going to improve my profitability as a result of that. So there's certainly all of the benefits of the harvest of the QBR. But I think there's an additional aspect of it that is maybe overlooked in it. And that is, for me to be able to deliver QBRs every quarter to all my clients, it requires two things. Number one is I have to be running my business in a way that's pretty organized, right? I'm going to have to be ahead of the curve. I got to be tracking. QBRs take a lot of time, so I've got to be good at allocating the resources needed to do those. We also have additional guidance in terms of how to charge and make sure that you're capturing sufficient gross margin on QBRs. We can talk about that in a moment, but basically I've got to be running my business in a way that's pretty regimented to be able to deliver. The other factor, though, that I think is probably the most overlooked one is I have to get C-level executive participation in these meetings, and the only way for them to be effectively delivered, and the only way I'm going to do that is if I set the table for that as an expectation during the sales process. So if I onboard the client and don't bring any of this up, and as we're going through onboarding, shortly after, I go to schedule the first meeting and say, hey, we're going to start doing these quarterly. And by the way, Mrs. Executive, Mr. Executive, you need to be in these meetings, and here's why. Well, they may or may not be too thrilled at that point to hear that, right? And they may not be willing to participate. The MSPs who are highest OML on this, early on in the sales process, when they're talking about getting ready to do a paid assessment, they're doing early stage qualifications, they're bringing up to the client that, hey, if, and that's an if, we bring you on as a client, we're not a fit for everybody, but if we determine we're a fit for you, one of the things that we need back from you for us to do our job is we need to meet with you every quarter, and you need to be the person in this meeting, and at least a couple of times a year, if not every one of them. And here's why. We can't do our job without having an interaction with you and a dialogue on what's going on in the business. Have you updated your strategic plan? What's your growth plan for next year? What's your budget? What technologies are you looking at that are going to help you to grow your business? Are you opening any new locations? Are you doing any acquisitions? We need to be having discussions with you at an executive level to really understand ahead of time what's going on in your business to that degree. And in return, we're going to provide you a roadmap. We're going to have a budget for you that will eliminate surprises on CapEx. That'll be a 12 to 24 month budget for you. So we're going to map all this out, but we can't do our job without these meetings and without you being in them. So I need you to commit to us as part of the engagement to be in them. And I actually know some MSPs that have written this into their SLA and have a penalty for non-participation for the clients. And I'm not, for the record, I'm not fully recommending that. I think it's a pretty bold move, but if I'm talking to the client during the sales process early on about this, who's going to be really excited about that message and who's going to be turned off by it? Well, the buyers that are going to be turned off are going to be the buyers who consider IT a pain, that it's a necessary evil in my business. I want to spend the least amount on it that I can. If I never have to talk about or think about IT, that's a good day, right? Those are going to be the business leaders that are going to hear that and say, I don't want to do business with you if I have to do this every quarter. And that sounds like a lot of overkill. The ones who are going to be really thrilled to hear that are going to be the strategic buyers, the ones who are looking for a partner in IT, somebody who's really going to engage with them and help them take their business to the next level. And they understand that IT is critical to achieving their business goals. In other words, the 20 to 25, 30% of the buyers who most value IT and ergo are most willing to pay for quality. So I think the other reason you see that differentiation on gross margin and on EBITDA is that the providers that are doing that and setting the table early on in the sales process, those are the providers who are able to charge more. They're higher OML providers. And so there's a benefit both post-sale and there's a benefit pre-sale on doing QBRs and delivering them the right way. If you go in and it's just a ticket dump, no matter what your requirement and how much you set the table early on, you're not going to get executives to join them in the future, right? But if you're delivering the right content and you're creating the expectation of client executive participation early on in the process, I think those two things really go together, and that's what drives the results you see on this slide.
So one of our partners who's on the call is quoted in one of the books because he believes if you don't kind of jump right into the business review process, that it's easy to miss expectations all around, right? If you say like, oh, we're going to get you going for 6 months and then have a business review, your whole strategic vision might have misaligned. So, I think it only further supports what you're saying is it's got to be, we always say the QBR process is your sales process, but also there's a ton of value for, getting it right on the table right away. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I have two things. One, I appreciate the Packers helmet in the background. As a lifelong Packers fan, I appreciate that. Just need to sneak that in. But the main question I have is, do you deliver these every quarter for all of your customers or a certain set of customers or a certain price point? Like, how are you able to justify the cost of putting these together with what your customer is spending with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So our answer, and I know that this differs a bit from some answers that maybe Marnie you'd have or others might have. Our answer is that if they're too small to justify a quarterly QBR, they're too small to justify your greatness that as a provider. And so our guidance on it is quarterly, and I mean, it's one of the few deliverables that actually has the interval in the name, right? I love all the new names, by the way. I've heard over the last year, my favorite was OBRs, which is occasional business
Oh,
reviews.
I was like, what's, I've heard
That was a new
PRs
one.
for periodic.
Yeah, I've heard periodic business reviews or PBRs. In this neck of the woods in Wisconsin, PBR has a different meaning.
It usually has a blue ribbon on
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I've heard PBRs, SBRs is a common one, strategic business reviews, OBRs. You can change the name, but it doesn't minimize the need to do it. Yeah, we've got TBRs and RBRs. I love it. I haven't heard RBRs before, random business reviews. So I know some providers who do different formats. They'll meet quarterly with the client, and once or twice a year they'll have a true executive engagement meeting that goes for a longer period of time. But in the meantime, they're covering the basics of the QBR. It's just a shorter format, and that's how they do it. If you do that and you're able to still get executive participation, that's probably fine. I know other providers though who really the reason that they changed the name on it is because they slide, it's tough to do it. And part of the reason it's tough to do it is, as you alluded to, Andrew, if you're doing them right, they're expensive to deliver. They take, on average, you're probably, once you get the machine really built, most providers are looking at 8 to 10 hours a time per QBR. Why? Because beforehand, if you're sufficiently preparing, whoever is going to lead the meeting, that person's going to be involved with the service team and really analyzing, are there any issues and how have we done since the last QBR and what's still open, etc. They're updating the roadmap. You're doing all these things to prepare for the meeting. So that if you really count all of the individuals' time who are involved in that pre-meeting prep, that's several hours of time. I mean, even if you have a 1 hour meeting, but you have 3 people in there, well, that's 3 hours of time, right? The meeting itself is going to be an hour and a half or so. And if you're traveling on site, there's even more time. And then the overlooked factor is the post-meeting follow-up. If you're doing your job during the meeting, you're capturing a lot of things that you're going to need to follow up internally with others in the organization. Documentation items, there's 2 to 3 hours minimum of follow-up that you're going to see. So if you add it all together, you're easily at 8 to 10 hours. So what's critical is that you're ticketing all of that time and you're capturing that time. This is no different to the deliverable than the time spent taking a ticket, right? If I've got a ticket coming in, well, there's no doubt that I'm going to open up a ticket on it. I'm going to document my time. I'm going to capture that time. If I'm working on a project, I'm documenting that time. But for some reason, QBRs and there's other places we see it too. Onboardings are another one, but QBRs for some reason are a source of tremendous service gross margin leakage because providers aren't capturing that time in the tickets. So you're doing a gross margin analysis on a customer to determine their profitability. Well, if you haven't captured this time in your tickets, that time is not going to show up in that analysis, and you're not going to really know the true cost to service this account. And so this is post-sale service cost. It should go into your service gross margin calcs. And if you're capturing it sufficiently, best-in-class service gross margins 51%. So the other reason it's important to capture it is it should be built into your pricing model. So, so this is something that you got to make sure that you're documenting the time that goes into it. Using a tool such as we're talking about today with Lifecycle Insights is really important for streamlining that and helping to build a process in and really build robust architecture around your QBR. But make sure you're booking your time and capturing it. Make sure you're marking it up sufficiently in your pricing.
So I always find it interesting to see when hands go up, like we know we've triggered something. So Zach, I'll have you go first.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Peter. This is great information. I'm curious on the booking of time. Does that apply to technical resources as well as like your sales and or customer success manager type resources as well?
All of the above.
Okay.
So it especially, I mean, it applies to your post-sale. When the way that we book, anybody who benchmarks with service leadership already knows that all of our service gross margin labor, that's inclusive of everybody who supports the client post-sale. So that includes project management, it includes if you have a post-sale account manager, it certainly includes all of your service team, your technical team, your service managers that would be involved in that. But anybody who post-sale is going to be supporting the account should be capturing time.
That's great. Thanks very much.
Luis?
There seems to always be, Peter, hyper myopia on the cost of doing QBRs a ton, and I rarely hear the conversation around the opportunity cost of not doing them, of course. And I'm curious, you know, what data your stuff supports around the opportunity cost of QBRs, because you know the EBITDA is one thing. You know, if you can increase EBITDA by 13% if you're doing QBRs regularly, then that's kind of a number that's very specific. But we all know that QBRs often generate a lot more business than strictly EBITDA, of course.
Yeah, well, and if you look at back to the data that I showed in that slide, the product and managed service gross margin, on managed service gross margin, the providers who are doing QBRs 4 times a year and therefore are incurring the highest cost of delivering those services, they have their EBITDA and their service gross margin is much higher. So they have to be capturing a lot of additional revenue and capturing much higher pricing because they're incurring all of this additional cost. And so what I'm showing you is net of the additional cost, right? So if you drill, if I don't have the slide in front of me, but if you drill down within that, what you'll see is that those providers are selling at a much higher price point, and those providers are selling a lot more. So yeah, I mean, I'm up in Wisconsin, up in dairy country, farm country. The analogy that works well up here, maybe not all parts of the country or all parts of the world, but the analogy that works well around here is if you're not doing QBRs, it would be like a farmer planting their field and then not watering it in the summer and not showing up to harvest it in the fall, right? It'd be insane. Why would you do that? And so if you're doing QBRs on a quarterly cadence, every one of those meetings, you should be walking out with customer commitments and moving forward with new sales as a result of those. So there's definitely a correlation there.
On the commitment piece, you know, I've heard Paul Dipple say a few things. You know, the commitment to the cadence makes the customer upgradable when you need them to be upgradable. And so even if there's no immediate project outcome from the QBR, there's at least a commitment that, you know, in 3 months or 6 months or whatever amount of time, there will be, you know, a focus on an effort or project or delivery of some kind. But clearly the lack of the cadence creates this vacuum of the customer just not feeling like they need to do anything or not knowing. And obviously MSPs, their biggest enemy is doing nothing in most cases. So super insightful. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I would add a couple things to that. One of the keys to getting that commitment is I think an essential component of every QBR is a written agenda. I would have, and that agenda might be almost identical to the agenda that I used on the QBR for a different client yesterday, with the difference of I changed the name and the date, hopefully, on the top. But what should be in that agenda is, it can be very simple, 4 or 5 bullet points on what we're going to cover, review of past quarter action items, what we're going to cover today. And at the end of the agenda should be areas of commitment needed. And you list those items out so that, and if you do that for every one of your QBRs, you're going to achieve a couple of things. Number one, you're sending a message of professionalism to your client, that you're coming in, that you're prepared, you've done your homework, you're ready for this meeting, all those things that set the meeting off on the right foot and reinforce the level of provider that you are. But the second thing it's going to do is it's going to tell them, we have an hour and a half. Here's all the stuff that we need to get through in that hour and a half. And before I leave, these are the 2 or 3 or 4 or 1, however many items that I need an action from you on before I can leave here today. So that when you get to the end of the meeting, you're not saying all of a sudden, oh, hey, I brought this project proposal, can you sign this? Or I'm going to send over an e-sign, I forgot to bring this up, right? They're going to know that part of the meeting is these 3 or 4 things. So to your point, that if you get that cadence established, they're going to know that in this meeting, this is when we're going to discuss that stuff. And so it's a great vehicle. And I know Paul has talked a lot about this in the past, but it's a really great vehicle for when you need to introduce new technology to your tech stack, right? I've got, we have a lot of guidance in Sleek on how to best practices for doing that. But the short version is, you want to get 100% of your customers on that new technology within a year at most. So working it into the QBRs, you might be able to get it done even faster. You're able to dedicate some technical resources to upgrade all your clients to get them all in this new tech stack. And you know, at the end of that finite period of time, that we're back in alignment with 100% of our managed clients on 100% of our tech stack. And so the QBR vehicle is a wonderful one for doing that. You come in, the clients know that that's what the kind of stuff you cover in there. The other benefit is the clients know that they're going to have this regular interaction with you, that if there's something they need to bring up, that it doesn't need to fester forever, right? So they can come to those meetings. And another one of our recommendations is, right out of the gate, ask the client if there's anything, here's what I've got on my list to cover, here's the things I need from action items from you at the end. Is there anything else that you were hoping to talk about today? And if there's some ticket that's bothering them, or if they had bad interaction with a team member or any of that kind of stuff, you don't want them to hold that till the end, because that's all they'll be thinking about until they bring it up. So get it out of the way right out of the gate. But if you go in with an agenda and set the expectation, it helps you stick within the parameters of what you need to cover and get through all that.
I'm gonna call on Ron.
So I've got a question. I cannot get a lot of my clients to the table. I can't even get them to let my tech in to do the business review. They just continue to ignore. And at some point, you know, when we do get in there, it's like it almost becomes a sales call. And I've had one that actually brought that up. How do you take and get around this? I mean, because it's like I'm getting like only about 10% of my business reviews now.
Yeah, back to the early thing we talked about, the most important thing to me is to set that expectation during the sales process, that this is a requirement. I'd put it in your SLA as in your sales material as part of the engagement requirement. I'm not suggesting to put in the punitive aspect in the SLA, but I'd put in that one of your needs from the customer. The second thing that I usually see when I talk to, when I look at MSPs in that situation is, I'm not saying this is particularly you, Ron, but typically what I see is that they've historically delivered the QBRs in a way that did not deliver that strategic value to the client. And so if the client goes through 1 or 2 QBRs and they come out of those and they don't feel like this built alignment or this built strategic value for us, and it's not worth my time as an executive to participate, then they're going to typically try to avoid it. So we see that a lot. The other thing is, as you grow your business, you're going to find that some clients just aren't going to be clients that you want to have long term, right? And so as you build your business and you start to do these things with your other clients, it's no different from other things that you do for your clients. Some are going to be better at complying with what you're doing, and some are not. And so whether that's at renewal or other times in the engagement, some of those, it can lead to some tough conversations with the clients. But if you're setting the table during the sales process and you're delivering a really high value QBR, usually they're going to want to come in and want to participate in those meetings.
So there's quite a bit in the chat. Kirk, I'll call on you in just a second. But Alex just put in the chat, my rebuttal is, if you want to give me your full budget and allow me to make unilateral decisions, then you certainly do not need to come to the table and be part of this. Kirk, you had your hand up first, then I'll go back to Ron.
Yeah, I think if you also establish it as a business technology review and not just, hey, we've got all these recommendations for us to jack up your prices even more. So for us, we talk about the business. Like the first QBR we have with a new business is, what are your goals? What are your KPIs? What are how are you trying to achieve success in your business? Because if you have that connection on a business level, then it doesn't sound like you're showing everything. There are questions in our QBR that talk outside of the typical, hey, you need cybersecurity. We talk succession policies. What happens if you die? I'm going to lose revenue, because if you don't have a succession policy, your place is going to crumble. And so I think if you bring it up as a business technology review and not just a, hey, we're having a technology review, it's made for a lot better communications with my clients. I've got a couple that will sit for an hour, even if they're, we've got maybe 5 items to go over. We'll talk business, and it's kind of building that trust too. And for me, I've had some resistance before, but I think once you kind of transition and not just be, hey, we're just going to talk tech, new server, and all they're seeing is dollar signs, but see the value of it. And for me, it's, at the end of the day, it's your decision. For me, it's being as transparent as possible, so that way you're not coming up to me afterwards and going, well, why didn't you tell us that we needed this? Well, it's here. And at the end of the day, it's your business, the way you make decisions, but I'm here as your trusted business advisor, not trying to be your account manager. And I think if you can shift it, that it's helped us quite a bit in maintaining those QBRs with all of our clients.
Yeah, Kirk, I think that's really smart. I think you want to either have that in that discussion in your first QBR, or have it during the sales process. I'll see often that's part of the assessment process, to be able to tie the recommendations that you've got for their business back to the things that you've learned about their strategy and their growth goals and other. But either way, you want to get those things early on. And our guidance is to break the QBR up into a third. The first third is looking back. So since we last met, now in a first meeting, that's going to be a little different, but since our last meeting, here's what's gone on with the business from our perspective. Here's the different projects we completed, etc. You guys opened up a new location. Here's how that went, whatever the review is. But you only want to spend a third or less on that. The next third should be, what's going on in the business? What are you seeing coming up? If it's fourth quarter, they're doing their budgets and they're doing their growth goals. So what are they planning on for next year? Are they making any changes in their business? So what's coming up in the business? And that's really where you just shut up and listen as much as anything and just get them to talk. And my experience is that business people love C-level business people love to talk about their business. They love to talk about their plans, what's going on in their business, their culture, all those things. They love to give tours of their businesses. So if you use that time to get them to talk, the last third really is, based on what you've said, here's the updates that we see to the roadmap. Based on what you've said, we came prepared with this project that needs to be done. But what you just told me tells me that this is no longer valid. I need to go back and work on that. or it is still valid and it matches up to what we were already planning. So here's the proposal or whatever. So the last third is really, what are we going to do now going forward? So, so I think that always helped for me when I learned that as an MSP, and that's something that we teach as well. So
when I present at Evolve, Trisha just put in the chat, sometimes changing your agenda around a bit to starting with the business goals, then discussing how technology supports that. I use some of Trisha's examples when I'm presenting to Evolve members of a good agenda, because she's certainly, she has definitely aligned with what you're saying there. Ron, did you have follow-up or do you question? Or mute?
No, I don't have, I'm just, like I said, I'm just kind of concerned right now because I feel like I'm losing touch with clients. And, you know, when they won't even let my tech in to, or set up a time for him to come in and ask questions for the business review. It's like, you know, all of a sudden we don't know the goals of the business. We don't know where they're heading. I've got one that moved. We didn't even know they moved.
oh yes.
So I don't
Ex-
know, Peter, if you have any hacks for that. One thing that I used to do when I was a CRM was to cyber stalk my partners' websites and see if they had put their strategic goals in there so I could call them knowing what they wanted to talk about and see if I could approach with a question that way instead of just blindly, what are your goals? Oh, I see on your website you're expanding to a new location. Did you want to talk about X, Y, or Z? I don't know if you have other suggestions along those lines, because I was certainly in a very different vertical.
Yeah, boy, that's a tough one. I mean, I can't imagine a situation where I'd have a client that did that. And there's certainly times when you struggle to get meetings and clients are blowing you off. One of the hacks that I recommend is, one of the common tactics a client will do is, if they're trying to blow you off and not participate, they'll schedule the meeting, they'll take it, and then they'll try to cancel last minute, or they'll try to push you to a lower level person in the organization. And so if you need C-level participation in the meeting, and a half hour before the meeting, or you show up on site for the meeting and they say, oh, she can't make it today, so I'm going to fill in, I'm the office manager, or I don't know, I'm that person's admin or whoever, and she said I can pass the information on to her. My advice is always cancel, reschedule the meeting. I really need to have this person in the meeting, I see in the chat the suggestion to bill for your time if it happens multiple times. My experience is typically once you send the message that trick isn't going to work, that they won't do it again, or will rarely do it again. But ultimately, it's no different than clients who refuse to put in MFA, or clients who refuse to do anything else that you need to do to support them. If they refuse to do it, it's part of what you need to do your job. You're going to need to get rid of them as clients and have a tough discussion with them, or at least be willing to. If you reach out a lot of times to a client and say, hey, we've really struggled to service you guys. I have a concern about continuing the relationship, and here's the concern. If we can't do this, we can't continue to service you, and it's too high risk for us to have you as a client. I'm going to need to not renew you at renewal, but I'd like to keep you. Here's what we need to do to turn this around. Can we do that? Ultimately, some clients are going to be clients that value what you do, and some aren't. So you don't want to waste your time on the ones that aren't. Usually, when we do client gross margin analysis and work with MSPs on that, and they stack rank their clients, it's amazing how many times their D clients for gross margin also are their most difficult clients. They're the ones who don't do meetings. They are the ones who cause a lot of fire drills, and they're last minute people who need all this stuff done. And so stack ranking your clients at least once a year, but ideally quarterly, and looking at gross margin, it's amazing the correlation between your best gross margin clients and the ones who are all in on what you're doing and QBRs and all that.
We love those confrontational conversations, don't we, MSPs? Yeah.
We
That's a
definitely had folks. say-
sarcasm. I take it, Louise.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, it's an interesting commentary that comes up quite often, whether it's, in Reddit threads or Facebook groups or Slack channels. Most MSPs are afraid to talk to their clients. And I think this is just because of where we come from. We like being the heroes. We like helping. We like, being asked to help and being told what to do in that respect. And not everybody, comes out of that shell to run a business and drive profitability and do the things that need to be done. And so it just takes practice. I love how you framed the nuance of literally saying the words the way you articulated them just now, because sometimes coming up with the right thing to say that is not confrontational is also really hard in the moment, because we're so emotionally tied up in the disrespect the client is showing to us in that moment that we just can't imagine saying anything other than you're fired. But so I appreciate sort of those little tidbits of takeaways.
I
Yeah, I
picture
mean-
like, on the YouTube review, it'll be rewinding Peter's like script right there for those 2 sentences, because they were very good. Sorry, Peter.
I will
No.
post them in the summary. I will literally take that little tidbit and type it out so people can go put it in their OneNote and practice it daily.
Yeah, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of aggressively firing your clients. But one of the things we do see is that the best in class, the top quartile performers out there, they add roughly the same number of new logos a quarter as the bottom quartile does. They're just adding better clients, and then they're doing that analysis on client profitability every quarter. And so for every 2 or 3 new logos they're bringing in, they're willing to let one of their D clients walk. And they don't do it by going to their D clients and telling them you're fired or I'm not renewing you. What they tend to do is they look at what would it take to get this D client to an A client in terms of pricing. And so they'll go back to the D client and say, and now in the case that Ron brought up, they might go back to the D client and say, hey, for me to renew you for another year, it's been a difficult year because we haven't been able to get you to do quarterly business reviews. That's created a lot of issues for us. We don't have great efficiency alignment with your organization. So for us to continue on with you, we need to get a commitment. We're going to do that. So that might be part of it if they're a profitable client at the right level. But what the best in class folks are really good at is going back to that client and saying, here's your new number for this year. And the client goes, are you out of your mind? This is 30% higher than last year. And they go, yeah, I understand it's a lot. We go back and look at cost of support, and we look at a lot of factors, and we'll be happy to continue to do business with you. But right now, we're out of whack with your pricing model. And so we need to bring it back into alignment for next year. And by doing so, probably 80% of the clients are going to say, I'm not going to renew. I'm not signing this. And, but 20% or so will. And so if they stay on, you're keeping them on. Now they're at a gross margin, and you got a commitment from them on compliance to whatever they're out of compliance with, whether it's QBRs or MFA implementation or how they call your people, whatever. But those other 80%, they were losing you money anyway, right? So it's no harm offboarding them, and it's not something you want to do all the time. You want to find the right clients ideally, but you can do everything on the front end to find the right clients, and there's still going to be some that are going to come on that just aren't going to be the greatest. So
I think when you don't have a relationship with your client and there's a problem with the relationship, they tend to associate you with the problem of IT. Is usually the problem.
Anything goes wrong.
Yeah, and that they're the person that you're the person that they speak to. So subconsciously, you almost caused the problem in the first place. So it's probably worth getting rid.
Yeah, and as everybody on here acutely knows, things will go wrong. So it's no different than any other relationship. If you've built up that positive bank account, with the other individual or the other company. When things go wrong and there's a withdrawal needed from that bank account, you've got still plenty of balance in there. And so these meetings are a great way to build up that bank account balance.
Political capital, I'd like to say.
I'm yet to meet a client though that if you show them clear risk, no one wants to own the I don't care statement against that. If you're clear with them in terms of, you know, what that is, they usually will handle it some way or other, and it's usually an inroad.
Yeah, I remember a war story from I ran an MSP that was about 85 employees, and several years ago, I knew one of the business owners who was a client of ours prior to becoming a client and after. And this particular client got ransomware, and so the owner reached out to me and said, because we had gone in with a series of recommendations of things they needed to implement. And among them was MFA. And this back in the day when MFA was an optional thing for many clients and MSPs. And the owner said, Peter, why didn't you ever tell us that we needed to do this stuff before we got the ransomware? And said, we told your person who reports to you and this meeting, and this meeting. And here's the quotes that we provided. And here's the emails telling us that you're not going to buy them. And he said, well, nobody ever told me. And so, well, I don't know what to tell you on that. And so if he would have been in that meeting, but he didn't want to be, he was running a large enough company that he really wasn't the decision maker. His decision maker was so focused on saving money at all costs and wouldn't listen to us. And so sometimes it takes those kind of events to wake people up too. But those are not fun conversations to have, to be sure.
My record is 7 server quotes, and then the server died, and then show them the 7 quotes.
And Peter, I think you just hit on something that's super important for MSPs to be aware of, like just the recognition that we have this issue is the same issue that some of the folks that the meetings get pushed down to on the client side have this very same issue, which is we apply our own financial values to the client relationship in the sense like, oh, this is too expensive, my client will never go for that. And then sometimes those office managers or those non-C-level execs that are being given that task of that meeting don't even present these things for the same reason. It's like, yeah, this, you know, my boss will never go for this because I think it's expensive. And I think part of the strategy is to try and work ourselves even out of that that sense of financial imposition, because the challenge is always we don't understand what tolerance for risk the clients have necessarily if we're not even having the conversation. So just a quick comment on that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Before I started to benchmark in my MSP with service leadership, we were really struggling with gross margin, and our sales, I would talk to our salespeople and our SE about pricing, and the answer was, well, we just can't price it high enough and we can't do this and that. And then I saw in our benchmarking compares how much under the best in class we were, and we went back and said, here's what we're going to start charging. Here's our floor for pricing. And hardly any clients brought up anything about it. It was a non-issue to the clients, but we had worked ourselves into a lather about the impact and how many clients we're going to lose, and so definitely I think internally we tend to be our own worst enemies on a lot of those things. The second thing is, though, the mistake that we made in that relationship with that I was talking about with ransomware was the owner was ultimately he was the one who ultimately signed the contracts. He ran a big enough company, but he ultimately signed the agreements. And when I'm asked who should be in the meetings, my answer always is who ultimately makes the decision and signs the contract, because they need to understand the value of what you're providing. You need to have the relationship with them. It's certainly good to have the relationship with people under them. It's nothing wrong with that. But whoever, and so it depends on your target customer profile. If you're selling to SMBs who are 20 to 100 employees, well, that's usually going to be the owner or the president of the company. If you're selling to a mid-enterprise or small enterprise customer, and maybe your target customer profile is 500 to 1,000 employees, you're probably not going to be meeting with the board on a quarterly basis, right? You're probably not going to be meeting with the CEO quarterly. but they probably don't sign your contract. It's probably the CFO or maybe CIO in some cases who does. So that's the individual who needs to be in the meetings, right? So it really depends on the size of customer who you're working with, who needs to be in them.
Brian?
Yeah, we've got an interesting client right now that's legacy that we've had since 2005. Medical office, and the son's taking over, kind of stepping in dad's shoes. And they got a ton of tech debt. We've been trying to meet with them forever about, and they won't give us the time of day. They even did a migration of an on-prem EMR to a cloud without even letting us know they were doing that. And now I'm like, okay, well, now that we've got the son involved, maybe we can repair this, make this relationship better. But then the mom, who's the office manager, is like, no, my son sees patients all day. He's not going to deal with IT. And I'm like, well, he's going to be taking the business over. He needs to be involved in IT. He can't just be a doctor only and assume everything else around him is going to happen without him needing to be involved. So it's interesting, some of the maturity levels you get. There's a medical office with 3 sites. It's not like they're tiny, big name in the area, but it's just kind of it's a family run business, right? So it's a different type of maturity that you're dealing with as far as a business goes.
Yeah, some can be really high maturity, some are not. I think you bring up a really good additional point, Brian, and that is making sure that when there's a transition in the decision maker, that you don't assume that any of that relationship capital or relationship goodwill carries forward. You're starting over as a business, reestablishing your value. So all of those discussions you had about business goals and long-term plans for the business and how that person sees the world, you have to assume that everything is now different and that there's a new set of goals and you also have to assume that this person knows nothing about what you do for the business. And if you assume that, well, yeah, but their office manager's still there and this other person's still there and they like us, that's a huge mistake. So you want to get in as quickly as possible and meet with that individual as quickly as possible. Otherwise, oftentimes they'll either view you as an expense that they can cut and boost profitability, or they'll view you, or they may have their own relationship and they may have a golf buddy or a friend or somebody else that they worked with. If they're coming in not as a second generation, but they're coming in as a CEO from a different business, well, they probably have a relationship on IT from that business, right? So you need to get in and really quickly identify what you do, the value you bring, understand what they're trying to achieve, and early on get an idea if they're trying to kick you out, and understand how to manage that relationship.
It's a little trickier too, that this is the office, the doctor that delivered my daughter, 13 years ago. So there's that relationship too that's in play.
I live in a small town, so you're preaching to the choir on that. I'd walk into the grocery store and have all of the teachers that use the platform that I would be the CRM for, like, ask me questions about it, or yada yada. I get that.
Don wins the internet. Just book yourself into a full body checkup and then just bait and switch him.
Well,
while I'm here,
said it might be his wife needs to do that, but yes.
Imagine watching your baby being born and then in the corner of your eye seeing a Windows 7 device.
I know that we volunteered your time on a Friday afternoon in summertime. I super appreciate it and want to value that time. So I think we all say thank you very much for coming. I think I was fascinated when you told me those stats before, and I'm really glad you brought them to the party. So and thank you all for joining.
Thanks for having me, Marty. Anytime. I enjoy the hour went fast.
It definitely did. I really appreciate it. Thanks all.
Good material.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks,
you.
everybody. Look for quotes in your summary email on Monday.
Awesome.